looking at the regulation of providers in those lower level categories, such as 1 to 3, versus though in 4 and 5, it's just worth understanding that with the New Aged Care Act, it was designed to have more proportionate regulation, meaning those lower risk services like cleaning and gardening would be subject to less regulation than, say, residential care and clinical care. So unlike the 1997 Act, which just had 3 classes of providers, residential care, home care and flexible care, the new Act has 6 categories of registration, from Category 1, which is your cleaning and gardening, those home and community services, right up to Categories 5, clinical care, and 6 being residential care. However, when you look at the new Act, there's actually surprisingly few differences between the regulation of providers in the various categories. So, if you're registered in categories 1 to 3, you do in fact have to comply with most of the conditions of registration. First, you need to comply with the Statement of Rights. This applies to all providers right from categories 1 up to category 6. You also need to comply with the Aged Care Code of Conduct and ensure your staff, and that includes your contracted staff, comply with the Aged Care Code of Conduct. But, of course, unlike providers in Category 4 and above, providers in Categories 1 to 3 don't need to have a continuous improvement plan, but they do still need to have systems to demonstrate their commitment to and capability for continuous improvement. Providers in Categories 1 to 3 are also subject to the requirement to have service agreements and care plans with their clients and to comply with the security of tenure or cessation of services rules, which really in a home and community sense means you have to establish you have grounds to terminate the agreement and you have to give 14 days notice. Providers in Categories 1 to 3 also need to comply with the worker screening obligations in terms of doing those criminal history checks, and they need to conduct suitability assessments of their responsible persons. Providers in Categories 1 to 3 are also required to comply with the record keeping and privacy obligations under the Aged Care Act. And finally, providers in these categories need to have an incident management system, a complaints and feedback system, as well as a whistleblower system. There are much more detailed provisions about what your complaints and feedback system needs to have to comply with this new Act than what there was previously under the 1997 Act or under the CHSP agreement. So it's worth making sure you're aware of those requirements and that they're built into your policies. In addition, the requirements to have a whistleblower system in place is new, and a lot of providers still don't realise how broad this is. It's not a typical whistleblower regime under this new Aged Care Act. It's much broader than that because anyone can make a whistleblower complaint. So whether you're registered in Category 2 or 5, you will have to comply with these requirements. Now, Category 1 providers do get off the hook a little bit here because they don't have to worry about having an incident management or a complaints and feedback or a whistleblower system. However, they do still need to report serious incidents to the Commission. So that does mean that even if you're just in Category 1, you will need to be providing some training to your workforce on how to identify and report a SIRS to the Commission. While most of the requirements apply, it's only at Category 4 and above that the requirement to comply with the aged care quality standards kicks in. That means providers in Categories 1 to 3 won't be audited in quite the same way that providers in Categories 4 and 5 will be. However, that doesn't mean that you aren't subject to rigorous oversight if you are only in that Category 1 to 3. First, because the new registration system under the Aged Care Act requires that you go for registration every 3 years, even providers in Categories 1 to 3 are going to need to regularly demonstrate their understanding of and compliance with the Act. Secondly, providers in all categories will be subject to regulatory oversight by the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission and the Complaints Commission. If the Commission identifies a regulatory issue as a result of a client's complaint or, for example, as a result of a SIRS report that you've made, they can then require the provider to provide information, and if they believe that you're not complying with the Act, they can exercise their various regulatory functions. Providers in Category 4 also have to have a plan for continuous improvement, as well as demonstrating their capability for and commitment to continuous improvement, as providers in Categories 1 to 3 have to do. Providers in Category 4 also have to comply with the financial and prudential standards, including having a financial and prudential management system in place. Now, those standards were only finalised a couple of days before the new Act commenced, so make sure you've had a look at them and that you've got a system that complies with those requirements. Other major difference between providers at the lower end versus Category 5 providers is that only Category 5 providers are required to comply with the governance conditions under the Aged Care Act. So just to recap on what those are, you have to have a majority of independent, non-executive directors on or board members on your governing body or your committee of management. You also have to have someone with clinical expertise sitting on the governing body. You also need to establish a quality care advisory, which reports to your governing body. And finally, you need to give your participants or clients the opportunity to establish and join a consumer advisory body on at least an annual basis.